Let's start with a joke or two just to lighten up the mood, and then we'll move into the hardcore material. The first item that I want to talk about is called the Welcome to the Husband Store. A new store has opened, a husband store. There's a sign at the entrance. You may visit the husband store only once. There are 6 floors, and the value of the products increase on each successive floor. The shopper can choose any item from a particular floor or go up to shop on the next floor, but she cannot go back down except to exit the building. So a woman goes into the store. On the first floor, the sign on the door reads, "Floor number 1, welcome. Here we offer men who have good jobs." Well, she says to herself, that's nice, but I want more. So she continues upward, where the sign reads, "Welcome to floor 2. Here we offer men who have good jobs and love kids." She's intrigued, but continues to the 3rd floor, where the sign reads, "Welcome to floor number 3. Here we offer men who have good jobs, love kids, and are extremely handsome." Wow, she thinks to herself, but she feels compelled to keep going. So now she arrives at floor number 4, where she's greeted with the sign, "Here we offer men who have good jobs, love kids, are extremely handsome, and help equally with the housework." She says to herself, wow, it can't get better than this. But then a voice inside her asks, well, can it maybe? So she goes up and reads the sign at the next floor. "Welcome to floor number 5. Here we offer men who have good jobs, love kids, are extremely handsome, help equally with the housework, and have a great sense of humor." Having found what she's looking for, she's tempted to stay. After all, you can't get better there. Look at the incredible profile that they're offering, a man that can do almost everything. But something propels her to go to the 6th floor, where the sign reads, and she's welcome to floor number 6. "You are visitor 42 million to this floor. There are no men on this floor. The floor only exists to prove that women are impossible to please. Thank you for shopping at the husband store." And while it's a joke, here's the problem. We've become a society that's used to having it all. We've become a society that wants more of everything. We're never satisfied with good enough. And tonight we're going to try to explore that area. And so many people waste so much of their lives and their years looking for something that doesn't exist. In Hebrew it's called a dimyon, a fantasy. While all their best years are swallowed up chasing fantasies, it's unfortunate. We want to try to be grounded. So I want to share with you a very interesting concept that I saw recently. What's the difference between a soulmate and a partner? Today, far too few people date in order to find their soulmate. Instead, they're searching for a partner, and they're confused in their priorities. These men and women want to find a person who provide them with many different and superficial things rather than a companion who can connect to them on a deepest level. And here's the problem. To find the perfect soulmate, you should focus not on what you have, but focus on what you lack. Unfortunately, we're not business partners that I bring the money into the equation and you bring the labor. Here you have one of the biggest mistakes people make. The way people today look for a marriage partner is by sitting down and making a list of everything they have to contribute to a relationship. So the man sits down and he says to himself, well, I'm good looking, I'm well educated, I come from a good family, I have a good sense of humor, I have a great job. Therefore, I should be looking for someone who at least brings the same contributions to the game. I need a woman who's pretty, who's highly educated, from a great family. This is the most common form of modern dating. It's also the stupidest way to date. Dating should never begin with a list of what we have. Rather, it must begin with making a mental list of what we lack. Because we want the person who comes into our life to fill our void. The biggest void of all is loneliness. Rather, you don't go into a relationship because you have something. Rather, you go into a relationship because you're missing something. And only by identifying that one big thing that we're missing are we guaranteed to find someone who actually makes us feel whole. And so the difference is, do I date like a peasant or do I date like an aristocrat? And that's very important. Today, unfortunately, because we became a society that has so much material possessions, we're paying a huge price because we act like aristocrats. Poorer classes have looked for one big thing in the person that they date. They look for someone who will fill their need of having someone to be with. The very first move by the aristocrat who wants a companion is to look at himself and he lists his qualities and he says, I'm attractive, I'm well educated, I come from a good family, I have a great sense of humor, I'm highly independent, I earn a lot of money. And so they want someone that has a lot of things. You know what? We have to act like a peasant. The peasant has a completely different orientation in dating. Rather than beginning with what he or she has, they begin with what they lack. They look at themselves and they see a person who's vulnerable, who's exposed to the whims of others, whose life turns on a dime from great joy to possible tragedy. And they feel lonely, not having complete faith in their own ability. They date in order to find a lifelong companion who will make them feel worthwhile. Someone who won't dismiss them as unimportant. For them, love is a salvation, not a luxury. The nobleman who owns a person will insult and abuse him. But whereas the aristocrat dates and marries for many small things, the peasant dates and marries for one big thing. Someone who takes away the pain and makes life a celebration. You can come home to someone who'll give you simcha, as we say in Hebrew, will give you joy. In choosing a soulmate rather than a partner, the peasant is given the greatest gift of all. Someone who holds him and holds her, takes away the pain of living and gives them happiness and pleasure instead. When I mentor many singles in dating, I tell them, take that person to a different planet, transform them, transform their day. They have so many worries and concerns. If you can be that breath of fresh air, you've made it with them. And that's what we seek to look for in a soulmate. Someone who can transform me to a world of happiness. The peasant with his shabby clothes and tiny hut has one word advantage over the aristocrat that makes all the difference in a relationship. Namely, humility. He's humble. He or she is humble. They're grounded. The peasant is not afraid to acknowledge that they depend on others. And this is what makes them such great lovers. They're not afraid to tell a man or a woman that more than loving or admiring them, they need them and can't live without them. So the dating process today is cloaked with mystery. Should I judge someone with my emotions or should I use my head? What are the common mistakes that people make and how do we avoid them? What character qualities should I be looking in a spouse? Or even more difficult to determine, which ones should I overlook that are not important? And since the world of dating has gotten progressively more complicated over the last few decades, perhaps it's because our expectations have grown, because today we have cell phones and we have iPhones and iPads and we're used to getting everything we want and we're told go for it all. And having it all is a secular push which has infiltrated and toxified our Torah societies. When we ask the million-dollar question, why do you think you're not married? We might get the stock answer, I just haven't met my soulmate yet. But we've yet to meet anyone who couldn't do more to facilitate the process. Yes, there are obstacles. For some of us, we simply need to meet more people. For others, we may be looking for a diamond rather than a diamond in the rough. Some of us may have commitment issues. I deal with this a lot. Some of us has emotional burdens or an inability to share our inner selves that's causing others to misjudge them. I train a lot of people to communicate more effectively, to be able to become more vulnerable. Some of us are unduly influenced by what others will think, which is what's called the smorgasbord syndrome. I want to make sure that what I do is judged by everyone as okay. I had recently, or maybe several years ago, flown in to give lectures in LA. My host was waiting for me at LAX airport. He seemed quite down, so I said, Rav Moshe, what's the problem? He said, I was working on this shidduch, that match that I put together. The boy had gone out with her 14 times, and now he's getting ready to propose to her. His cousin asked him, can I see the picture of the girl that you're dating, you're about to get engaged to? And the man showed him the picture. He goes, ugh, you're going to go out with her? She's not attractive. And at that point, the guy was so sensitive to what his cousin said that he dropped the match and he broke off the relationship. This is what's called the smorgasbord syndrome, when we're toxified with what other people think instead of knowing what's good for us. Understanding the obstacles that are standing in our way is the first step towards removing that obstacle so we can date with clarity and we can date with success. And so what's very important is to understand what are my needs versus what are my wants, and to create a list of my top 10 needs. I teach people how to do this. I often create it for them. What we need to do as we enter into a situation where we're dating for marriage is to create a top 10 needs list. And I'll explain that in a few moments what that is. Those are the things that you need in an individual in terms of character qualities that will allow you to feel whole, to feel complete, that will allow you to be at your best in a relationship. A want is superficial. A want is something like rich, worldly, classy, owns a lot of real estate, tall. These are superficial items. Versus a need is something like a giving, nurturing, generous, emotionally balanced, ambitious, has no anger issues. These are important needs. So we have to understand that we need to create a top 10 list. Once you create that top 10 list, then that is your GPS for life in terms of how to date effectively. Because what you do is you take your top 10 list and you put it on an index card. By the way, you don't need all the 10 on your list. I always tell everyone, majority wins. 6 out of 10 on your top 10 list and it's a go. We grew up in a society that extolled both love between a man and a woman and selfie love, yet this society was often capable of neither. We were told, the song tells us that the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's too little of. The radio used to sing to us. You may recall that famous song? While our divorce and teenage suicide rates soar, sentiments about love can fly high, but without knowing how to realize them, they're not worth much. Our fast-paced electronic life propels us towards immediate gratification. I want it now, which is one of the reasons we have such a high divorce rate, and I'm going to get into it in a few moments. Rather than relationships developing over time. And in an increasingly superficial society, we falsely define our bodies as ourselves and equate physical attraction with love when it could be nothing farther than the truth. But we're not hopeless. We just need a little bit of wisdom. And so we're going to share with a little bit of that wisdom today. And let me tell you something very interesting. There was a book written by a woman named Gila Mandelson, a woman who's a dating mentor, a very effective one, a very smart woman. And she grew up as an individual who wasn't religious. She was actually very secular. And a very interesting story how she became religious. She was invited to a wedding in Israel, and she came in her jeans. She was a college girl. And she came to an Orthodox wedding that her friend took her to, and she was told that the bride and the groom, which was standing under the chuppah, the bridal canopy, had never touched. She was shocked. What is it? How could it be they weren't touched? That led her into an odyssey of rediscovering her Jewish roots. And now she writes in her diary a beautiful story about her life. And she says the following. She was now on the path of becoming a religious observant Jew, and now she had met a person who was a Torah scholar. And she writes, after more than enough dating, it was clear. Avraham, today my husband, was going to propose to me for marriage. But first, Avraham told me, protocol requires that I meet the head of the yeshiva. So Avraham led me into the dean's office, or in Hebrew it's called the Rosh HaYeshiva, which means the head of the institution of the school. A decidedly rabbinic-looking figure sat behind a large desk. And he greeted me warmly with a beautiful, infectious smile. So you must be Gila. Immediately putting me at ease. He and Avraham exchanged a few pleasantries, and then my soon-to-be fiancé politely exited the room. Still smiling, the rabbi asked me about myself, my family, what I was doing, what I was learning, and the conversation was flowing, and I was surely certain that I was making a great impression on this very important individual. Suddenly there was a pause. The dean leaned forward in his chair and gazed at me intently. So he said, Gila, give me your definition of love. What's your definition of love? What does that word mean to you? Oh, I said to myself, I wasn't prepared for that kind of question. But I was doing so far, so well, I said to myself, I can handle it. So she offers up an answer, and she says the following, ladies and gentlemen. Love, Rabbi, I began confidently, is the feeling you have when you feel like you have that feeling. I trailed off, my confidence dissipating, like air leaving a balloon. I knew I blew it, and it just hit me at that moment. I'm expecting to love my husband to be, in fact, I'm starting to love him dearly. But I can't even define what love means. And so love is probably the most misunderstood word in the world. Some New Age magazines say that love cannot be defined. In my humble opinion, this is nonsense and depressing. For if love can't be defined, that means I can't actively pursue it, right? And that's not appropriate. First of all, love is more than a feeling, like I told the rabbi, but it has to be. For feelings cannot establish a lasting, eternal bond with someone. While physical attraction is essential and especially is required to add excitement to the loving relationship, physical attraction can also unconsciously draw you to a lousy human being, a grown-up baby, an abuser, or someone just totally wrong for you. If you have any doubts, just scan the shopping center next time you go to the supermarket and look at the latest Hollywood divorce, 90-day divorce. Handsome man married to gorgeous women, and the weddings barely last a year. And even if being with that person feels good, feelings are fickle. They can be here today and gone tomorrow. So love can't be based on a feeling. Therefore, while love entails and culminates in intense emotion, it must be based on something more solid. And that is, it's based on reason. So before we lose our heads, we must delve deeply into who the other person is that we're dating. We must evaluate not only his or her personality, but more importantly, their character and values. In Hebrew, it's called midot, measures. And I'll get into that a little bit more. We must identify that person's virtues, and they must be rooted in a belief system so strong that's strong enough to withstand temptation. So whether the person that you're dating, the man or the woman, is politically liberal or conservative, deliberate or spontaneous, extroverted or introverted, may be important, but it's not as important as what's really more important, and that is that person caring? Is that person loyal? Is that person patient with you? Are they responsible? Are they honest? Are they willing to work things out when there's a disagreement? Are they morally unshakable? These are far more important qualities to search for than whether they're politically liberal or conservative, deliberate or spontaneous. Love is not just about finding the right person, but love is about us being the right person. If we don't possess the values and character we want the other person to have, well, guess what? We have to get to work. In addition to seeing the good in someone, love requires that you remain focused on it. That means you just don't get married and think it's automatic pilot. It's our choice whether to magnify our partner's worst or best qualities when we're already in a relationship and in marriage. And because emotions often stem from thoughts, what we think affects how we feel. So if love isn't a feeling, love is an action, we can make it happen. Love is a verb. So what is love then? Well, let me share with you, Gila tells us, what the rabbi told me that day. I'd rather define it much as my husband's dean defined it many years ago. Love is the attachment that results from deeply appreciating someone else's goodness. Let me repeat that. Love is the attachment that results from deeply appreciating someone else's deeds and their goodness. It's not just a feeling, a passion. It's a system of attitudes, a series of actions which engender growth and life for the lover and beloved. And these attitudes and actions come from being moved by the person's goodness, because the person is inherently good, and their actions stem from goodness. A husband and a wife that build their marriage based on this kind of love won't throw in the towel when their relationship takes a downturn. Instead, they'll say, you know what? Underneath it all, Judy or Joey, you're still that same good person you've always been. So, you know what? We may have had our shakes in life, but we can get the good feelings back because the basis of our relationship is still solid. That's a love that lasts. Versus the following couple. I once met the perfect couple, Larry and Linda. They were on the same page in virtually everything. They agreed on travel. They agreed on politics. They agreed on diet, the environment, you name it. They were in agreement, in complete unison. I never saw and met two people so made for each other. And they seemed so happy together. Larry and Linda were enviable. And guess what? Larry and Linda are now divorced. Why? What happened? Because despite their amazing compatibility, why didn't their marriage last? Neither Larry nor Linda possessed the ethic of striving to improve themselves, to grow. Nor did they ever see marriage as a spiritual path, a sacred bond to commit to and work on, something which is the very essence of an Orthodox Jewish home, where the synagogue plays a critical role, where values plays a critical role, where derech eretz, or respect for one another, plays a critical role, where love for the one another, where being mevater, very critical word in Hebrew, which is let the other one go first. As a result, in Larry and Linda's marriage, self-centeredness took over, leaving each one more devoted to themselves than to the other person or to their crumbling marriage. To succeed in love, we must focus on what matters most: character and values. And so when we create a top 10 needs list, I'm putting in there things that matter to me. A person that shares, a person that's considerate, a person that's flexible, a person that's respectful, a person that's loyal, a person that's devoted, a person that's emotionally in keel, a person that cares about family, a person that's patient. These are high qualities that we are interested in. Unfortunately, we won't learn this formula from the media because they're not interested in character today. At this point, I want to just take a pause and ask a question. You want to assume that everyone marries Jewish, but it's not always the case. So I want to ask the question that was asked by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, may his soul be blessed. Why should we marry Jewish? What's it all about? The Jewish people have survived for thousands of years in the most adverse circumstances. And we're constantly being hit with challenges. Just look what happened last week in Israel with the 45 dead, including the Holocaust. We're threatened by intermarriage and assimilation. Jewish communities throughout the diaspora are experiencing demographic decline. Why has this happened? And can anything be done to reverse the trend? The challenge that we are faced today is how Jewish identity may be sustained in an open secular society. The greatest danger is failing to recognize that times have changed and that in consequence our priorities need to change also. Times have changed and we're beginning to sense how suddenly and radically they have changed. We have grown used to a situation in which Jewish identity was passed through the generations by habit, by memory, and an inescapable sense that being Jewish is what we are. But lately we have discovered that for our children, being Jewish is no more than a matter of choice. They know they can choose otherwise, if not for themselves, then for their children. It's not something to be taken for granted. I have a client right now who has 8 kids, and he got divorced. Unfortunately, he had a bitter divorce. And he tells me out of the 8 kids, 5 are religious, 1 is not, 1 was taken by the cults, and 1 is married to an outright Gentile woman. So it's nothing to be taken, we can assume anything anymore, that's an automatic. Our children will choose to be Jewish for one reason, only that knowing the drama of Jewish history, the richness of Jewish life, the grandeur of Jewish ethics, and the majesty of Jewish faith. They're proud to be Jews. So there's only one good argument Rabbi Sachs shares with us against intermarriage, and it is this. To be a Jew is to be a member of the people of the covenant, an heir to one of the world's most ancient, enduring, and awe-inspiring faiths. It is to inherit a way of life which has earned the admiration of the world for its love of family, for its devotion to education, its philanthropy, its love of tzedakah, of charity, its social justice, and its infinitely loyal dedication to its unique destiny. It is to know that our way of life, passed on from parents to children since the days of Abraham and Abraham and Sarah, can only be sustained through the Jewish family. And knowing this is to choose to continue it by creating a Jewish home and having Jewish children. No one who has been touched by Judaism's wings of eternity would willingly break the link between the past and the Jewish future. This and only this will ensure that we have Jewish grandchildren, which is, we must always dedicate as much of our resources to educating our children, ensuring that they know what it means to be Jewish and the destiny that awaits for them. So I said to you before that I'd mentioned a comment of what's going on. Why are we seeing such a rampant rise in divorce, even in our own circles? Why are so many Jewish couples divorcing? At a recent forum on singles, a father stood up and asked, why is it so hard for our singles to commit today? Why do we hear about so many young couples who are divorcing? What's going on? And we've singled out 4 key factors that we'd like to contemplate. Number 1, we live in a disposable society. Who fixes anything anymore? Growing up, there was always a store on the side of the main street that was a repair store. I remember them, tape recorders and washer dryers and toasters. But who fixes appliances anymore? Toaster ovens, microwaves, and alarm clocks get tossed into the garbage, while quickly outdated laptops, iPhones, and cars get traded in for the latest model. After all, new is always better. Our kids lose their clothing knowing, no problem, we'll just replace it. And this thinking has seeped into our attitudes towards the people in our lives. And we hear it in the conversations like, so what's the big deal? You hear it at cocktail parties. If I get divorced, I'll find someone else. When we see relationships as disposable, whether they're friendships or marriage, the sacred bond becomes easily unglued. We've lost the ability to value what we have, including the people we're supposed to cherish the most. And we have to always remember, relationships, all relationships, have their ups and downs. That's very important. We need to value the people and things we have in our lives. Work on appreciation and stop taking our spouses, our children, and our friends for granted. Number 2, instant gratification. WhatsApp, texting, emails have brought us to expect an immediate response. Otherwise, we wonder, what's taking so long? It's only been 30 seconds. Why haven't I gotten an answer yet? Instead of waiting our turn to be helped in the store online, we just click and order whatever we need, and we have next day delivery. Remember the days, I remember them, when you took your film to be developed when you were younger, and you anticipated a day that it would be ready for pickup a week later, 10 days later? Who can imagine not taking a photo in Las Vegas and having your cousin in Jerusalem see it not less than 10 seconds later? That's how we got used to today. Today I can be in New York, I can take a picture and ship it to London. Within 5 seconds they can see it. And that's seeped into our mentality. We've lost the ability to be patient as human beings. We've lost the ability to be patient as a society. We expect to have it all right now, here. And what does this have to do with relationships? Well, a whole lot. Serious dating and marriage takes work. You're not always going to see instant results. Love grows with time. The more we nourish our relationship, the greater we feel invested in the partnership. You don't automatically feel madly in love. It takes time. You labor at it. And that's important. Expecting instant gratification strips us of the opportunity to work through difficult times and climb life's tougher moments. Because you have to remember, talk to anyone who's been married 15, 20, 25 years, and they'll tell you this stuff. Sometimes there's money and there's no money. Sometimes there's food. Sometimes there's no food. Sometimes there's trips to the ER. And you have to have the wherewithal and the bandwidth to deal with this stuff. But if you can't, you're going to have a problem. It's very interesting, but I set up a couple who were going out for several months. And she had an issue because her ex, who had not been visiting for a year and a half, finally decided he wanted visitation rights for this particular weekend. And the mere fact, he was very abusive to her, the mere fact that he even called her sent shivers up her spine. Well, she was dating this guy that I set her up with, and suddenly he got alarmed that her ex called because he was under the assumption that since he hadn't contacted her in a year and a half, that he was out of her life. So he writes me a note. He says, you know what? I thought he was out of her life. It's not fair. And so he decides to go silent on her. She came in here yesterday practically crying after investing 2 months in going out with this fellow. And we quickly realized he didn't have the bandwidth to deal with anyone else's issues. He has his own issues, and that's okay. But how can you be a partner to another individual if you can't help them in their time of need? And while this person showed us his true colors, we saw right away, that's why it's important to date clearly and to take your time. And to be most important, to be able to determine if that person cares about you. And here we saw clearly an individual who didn't have the bandwidth to deal with anyone else's problems but his. He decided to tune out, sent her a text on Friday, I'm leaving for a few days, I'm not going to be in touch with you. This is after dating her for 2 months and speaking to her on the phone every day. Another thing that's causing divorce, FOMO, fear of missing out. We see parties posted online, on Facebook, on WhatsApp. People post their vacations, their delicious sushi dinners and steak dinners, and we think to ourselves, what about me? Why should I be missing out? And this is going on with regards to singles and married couples. We compare our lives to other people's lives. Maybe they have it better than me, and we know the grass is never greener on the other side. People are too busy counting everyone else's blessings to see that they have their own blessings. They have a job. They can go to the bathroom and have to sit for 6 to 7 hours on dialysis. They have children where other people are waiting for years, if not decades, to have kids. But the problem is we're too busy counting someone else's blessings to appreciate our own. Commitment to someone requires to be happy with what we have. As the Torah tells us, Ezehu Ashir, who is wealthy? Hasamech bechalko. He or she was happy with their lot in life. FOMO is the exact opposite. There comes a point where we must make peace with our lives. We need to make a decision to stop glancing at the other fellow's or the other lady's kitchen, or the other lady's backyard, or her extension, or her latest model car. Dating with one eye on who else may be around becomes an impossible way to create a lasting relationship. And you can't have a solid marriage thinking that others have it better than you. We must make a conscious mental U-turn. Stop looking at others and work on being satisfied. Lastly, we've become part of what's called a disconnected world. Technology has connected us, but it's also made us much farther apart. We don't communicate like we used to. We send text, which is one way. This is monologue, not dialogue. Singles have told us that dating has hit a roadblock when they began texting instead of talking. Husbands and wives converse while staring at their screens. Eye contact brings deeper connection. And that's lacking these days. Couples listen with half an ear and see with half an eye. Of course, our relationships are affected. We also get bored easily with those people that are close to us. We're constantly checking our phones. Our loved ones become irrelevant. And so we need to be careful. It's so important to be careful. So now, let's say you're dating. Let's get into the toolbox of what is your strategy. We need a strategy to date effectively. Well, let's deal with some physical areas. Examine yourself physically. Are you the best that you can be? Can you improve your appearance? Perhaps you need to visit a gym, lose some weight, see a nutritionist, update your hairstyle, whiten your teeth, redo your makeup, change your glasses, or put on contact lenses. Oftentimes I have to give little prods in these areas to both men and women to help them update their look. Have someone perhaps revamp your wardrobe. That's on the physical side. What about your attitude? Work on improving your attitude. Let's deal with people who are a little older, perhaps on their second marriages. Having served as a mentor for the past 30 years, we've seen it all. Second marriages that thrive, second marriages that are doomed from the start, second marriages that are wrecked by children, second marriages in which the children from both sides fuse together into a happy and cooperative unit, second marriages that collapse under financial strain, and second marriages that endure but are unhappy. Interestingly, the divorce rate among second marriages is higher than among first marriages. One would think that an individual who has gone through a divorce would have learned their lesson and will therefore not repeat the mistakes of the past. Alas, it's not often the case. Those who marry for the first time to fulfill certain needs, but they're not prepared to give in return, usually marry with the same intent the next time around. They haven't changed. The second marriage becomes nothing more than a walk down a precipice, a courtship leading to fresh disaster. Sometimes another questionable pattern is at work. One who leaves a marriage because of financial instability may, for example, try to find a new partner who offers the promise of financial security. The same is true of other significant marital issues, whether it's sexual fulfillment, lack of emotional connectedness, problems with in-laws, etc. Since the spouse left the marriage because of a particular problem, they understandably want to ensure they'll not have to contend with the same problem all over again. But life often plays funny tricks on us. The second time newlyweds find out, often after it's too late, that the new spouse is indeed different from the first. And while the new spouse may have what the first one lacked, he may also lack what the first person had. Now, following divorce, does it make sense for someone who's failed to marry again? Hardly anyone considers this question seriously. And even though we know the answer in advance, let's give it some thought. Though it's generally true that it takes two to tango and only one to untango, there's hardly a divorce in which the breakup is exclusively the fault of one of the partners. So it behooves any divorced person to engage in serious soul searching before remarrying, to contemplate what will be done differently so that the next marriage will be successful. Anyone who fails to do so before remarrying is irresponsible and not ready for remarriage. One who cannot recognize their mistakes and learn from them is bound to repeat them. And this is a common sense observation which falls into the important principle of loving your fellow as yourself, which the Torah teaches us. Or sometimes a second marriage follows the deaths of one spouse, and that poses other challenges. We wrestle with various emotions when contemplating remarriage. The unease can affect our ability to remarry even years after the death. It's odd that many people are more likely to question a marriage following the death of a spouse than when following a divorce. The key element is in this upside down reaction is the loyalty factor. No loyalty is expected towards a divorced spouse, but loyalty is expected towards a deceased spouse. Loyalty needs to be viewed from a Torah perspective, and that is clearly there's a mandate to marry is not to give marriage a try, it's to get married and stay married. A second marriage similar to a first marriage should not be hurried into. This is especially important because of the many factors present in second marriages that are usually not present in first marriages. The most obvious of these is children. Children of all ages are vulnerable, following either their parents' divorce or the death of a parent. This vulnerability can be manifested in a child viewing a potential newcomer to the family as an intruder, threatening to take away the time and affection of the parent upon whom the child most relies. The remarrying parent needs to make a genuine effort to understand and address the child's concerns. This is best achieved by listening carefully, acknowledging that their worries are not crazy, wild ruminations, and ensuring them that they'll always be loved and looked after. It helps even more if the newcomer goes out of their way to befriend the child and does things with them together with the biological parent. Actions that reinforce words go a long way for that newcomer to become part of that new family matrix. A newcomer must never come into a family with the attitude that you're replacing the parent. The proper attitude is that the new spouse is joining the family out of love for the children's parent, and therefore deeply committed towards doing what's best for the stepchildren. Children are a potential block to remarriage, but they need not be. As a matter of fact, I spoke at a barbecue last year. It was July 5th. It was one of the first events that we had. We still had to mask, but it was an outdoor event after many months being in lockdown. And a woman approached me. She was a gynecologist, and she wanted me to help her with a 24-year-old daughter to help get her matched up. And she said to me, She had been married 2 times. The first time, her husband decided to become religious. They had both married each other not religious, and he then became very religious, and there was a big gap between both of them, so they divorced. The second marriage, she said to me, was to a man that she really got along with. Unfortunately, what happened was, the children of both parties didn't get along, and as a result, they had to divorce. There was always problems. So we have to take that into consideration, that we're not replacing the parent. It helps if the children realize that it's important for the parent to be happy. Parenting always works better in contentedness than in melancholy. Children will be the prime beneficiaries of parental happiness. When parents are happy, children can prosper. It's also important for the children to realize that their parent has an ongoing mandate to be married, and that remarriage is therefore an endeavor that's worthwhile and has biblical connection to it. This realization can help to neutralize potential resistance to remarriage. Younger children are less likely to be able to appreciate this. Unfortunately, even older children and adults do not automatically embrace that right perspective. Many children make up their minds in advance, sight unseen, that they will under no circumstances like their new step-parent. Even if they can point to some objectionable character qualities of the step-parent, it doesn't justify behaving disdainfully, nor does it excuse their doing whatever possible to disrupt the new relationship. When the commitment to love others is the operating framework, a second marriage can not only survive, it can thrive and benefit everyone. When it's not the operating framework, problems abound, and though solutions can be found, they're usually only band-aids. Finances. Finances are often a sticky point in second marriages. The newlyweds bring their own financial resources and obligations to the new reality. Ideally, it's best if the couple fuses everything together instead of creating the threefold division of mine, yours, and ours. Sometimes it's not practical, especially if funds are legally designated for the children of one of the spouses. The most prudent arrangement is for each spouse to agree happily not to touch those designated funds. But it's likewise less than prudent to insist on strictly your mine formula, wherein the new husband, for example, refuses to have anything to do with the expenses of the new wife's children. But I have a very interesting scenario a couple of years back of a 64-year-old woman who came to me because she wanted to remarry. She was divorced. And I matched her up with someone who had been recommended to me. He was a 71-year-old man. He was active. He was clearly in good shape. And it was going well until he made one comment that really raised the red flag for me. He liked to travel. She had been the very successful office manager in a thriving dental practice. And he wanted her to not work, but at the same time, he wanted to travel the world. And he expected her to raise the funds necessary to pay for her own tickets to wherever they went. I said, whoa, hold on here. This man is about to sign a ketuvah, a marriage contract, where he takes on the responsibility. Ani eflach v'ani afarnes. I'm going to support. I'm going to be financially responsible for my wife. Now he's telling her, no, you have to raise your own money for your own tickets. So I said, Helen, this is it. We're checking out of this relationship. So we have to understand that the ideal concept is obviously we pool our resources together and we're all for the team. Now the former divorced spouse is another area. The former spouse is often a sore point in the new marriage. This is usually a reflection of the relationship that the newly married individual has with the former spouse. Though it might be far-fetched to expect that the relationship with one's ex be very good, it's not far-fetched to expect that it be functional. We have to figure out a way to get along with someone that we used to be married to, but we're not anymore. It is unfair for the innocent newcomer to the family to be dragged into old messes. In the Jewish way of thinking, the relationship between one's former spouse is subject to specific requirements under the heading of, and you have to be nice to someone else. Marriage is forever, even after divorce. And the obligation to be a mensch pertains even after the divorce. So we're not married anymore. But is the obligation any less required of us to be a mensch? This is true even if the divorcing couple have no kids, and certainly prevails when there are children. The elementary halachic logic is as follows. A couple who do not get along after divorce or when married, invariably, put the children into the uncomfortable position of having to choose sides. The children are then forced to violate their obligation to honor and respect their parents. The sparring and fighting ex-spouses thus transgress the all-encompassing and powerful exhortation not to put stumbling blocks in front of the blind. Striving to get along after divorce is not only sensible, it's halachically required by our Torah. And in case there's a former deceased spouse, obviously the new partner should respect the memory of the deceased spouse. On the other hand, the remarrying spouse must recognize that his primary responsibility is now to the new marital partner. I had the pleasure of being a matchmaker to one very significant rabbi in the New York area. He is very, very popular, and he gives lectures all the time. And I remember one thing he did after he got married to I matched him up with his wife, was he brought his wife into his house. He stripped the kitchen, he stripped the bedroom, he completely demolished it, and he said to her, honey, you decorate it any way you want. He had it all rebuilt. She deserved a fresh start. No one wants to be second place or to be the shadow of someone else. We need to take into account the feelings of the second spouse. We also need to appreciate the feelings of the children who will be pained if they see that their surviving parent has completely forgotten their deceased parent. As stated earlier, regarding all the unique challenges of a second marriage or any marriage, choosing the way of pleasantness is the best options. In Hebrew it's called the way of the Torah, the way of good character is the way of pleasantness, of how can we get along, how can we eliminate conflict. This approach brings out the best in us, it brings out the best in the couple. The joy and fulfillment in the marital relationship will then spill over to the entire family. Being sensitive, especially in these kind of circumstances, rather than being selfish and self-centered, is the most vital ingredient ensuring marital success. I'd like to speak about resumes. I always tell people you need a passport, and that passport is the first thing that people see about you, is that before they get to meet you, is they get a little snapshot of who you are, and that is called a dating profile or a dating resume. A dating profile, a dating resume is some brief information about yourself, similar to an employment resume, but a little different. Briefly, you describe, you write down your name, your age, if you're comfortable with that, your height. That's important because oftentimes there's a big disparity in height. Your education, tell us a little bit about your religious observance level. And then, most importantly, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us what you're looking for. About yourself is, what do you enjoy doing in life? How have you grown? What are your aspirations and goals for the future? Where do you see yourself? What are some of the things you enjoy doing, such as travel, music? How do you describe your personality? And to what you're looking for, tell us what you want in a partner in life, the kind of individual you want to share your life with. Are you looking for someone outgoing, more introverted? Are you looking for someone who's going to travel with you, someone who's growing spiritually? Tell us a little bit about your shul affiliation or synagogue affiliation. That's important. And most importantly, you need a few references, because more than ever today, we live in a world of, clearly there's a lot of deception out there. And so you need to ensure that at least you write down 3 or 4 individuals that know you well and can vouch for you. I often tell my clients and my students, I'd like to see 2 religious personalities on there, perhaps a rabbi, a rebbitzin, or significant religious individuals in the community, and maybe personal friends or people at work who know you well and can vouch for you. Now let me close with a cute story, something that gives us a little bit of a tremendous insight into human nature. In the 1980s, there began a movement of which the whole world is becoming more receptive to Judaism. Not just in the United States, but also across the world. So in Paris, there was a woman named Sarah Cohen. She was 21 years old. She had decided she was going to the University of Paris. She had decided that, you know what, I'd like to become more observant. And she even had this deep desire to become a CPA and get married to an individual who would be a Torah scholar. On the condition, she had no problem that she'd be willing to work and sacrifice so he can sit and learn in a yeshiva and grow. Her father said to her, it's time for you to date. So he mentioned to her uncle, and these were like traditional Moroccan Jews. They were not terribly observant, but they came to shul here and there. So her father's brother said to her, you know what, I have this great guy, his name is Joe Levy, and he goes to the University of Paris. Let me set her up with him, and he's learning. So there was this woman dressed very modestly, sitting in the lobby. They decided that the date would be, they would have drinks in the lobby of a 4-star hotel in Paris. And Sarah's sitting there all dressed up beautifully in a nice, elegant, conservative dress, when suddenly she's approached by an individual who's wearing a tie-dye Grateful Dead t-shirt and ripped jeans. And he says to her, are you Sarah? He says, can I help you? Were you sent by someone to give me a message or something? Clearly not what she's expecting. He says, I'm Joe. And she's like, church turns white as a ghost. He says, how could that be? He says, why? What's the problem? He says, I'm supposed to be meeting someone who's supposedly a yeshiva student, someone who's going to learn, who's involved in Torah. And she explains to him how she wants to marry someone who's going to be in Torah learning and she's going to support him. And he says to her, I learn. I'm at the University of Paris and I'm going to become an architect. I'm only 6 months away from getting my degree. And he says, why would you want to live your life and work for someone who is going to, where you're going to have to support him? And therefore it starts a dialogue, a heated dialogue between both of them. At the end, she says, I have to go now. And he says to her, he looks at her and he says something very interesting. What if I became that person that you're aspiring to be married to? And she says, no way that could ever happen. You're so far from it, it's like growing oranges in Alaska. Never gonna happen. She ran home and she let her father have it. What did you do? You wasted my time. You set me up with someone who's so far different from me. He then called his brother and told him what happened. A few weeks later, they get a phone call from the uncle. He says, I don't know what she did to him. The boy dropped out of his architectural degree. He was about to get a master's degree in architecture and decided to enroll in yeshiva in Paris. And he wants a second date with her. And so they pressed her and squeezed her a little bit, crossed her, her arm, and got her to go to a second date. They met again in the same hotel, and this time no more Grateful Dead t-shirt. He walks in there with a starched shirt, white shirt, blue pants, and he says to her, and he's got a kippah on this time. He says to her, I have to tell you, I'm so grateful to you. You changed my life, and now I'm living a life of fulfillment. I'm enjoying studying the Torah, and they're having a nice conversation. Whereupon he says to her at the end of the date, can I have a third date? And she thinks about it and she says, you know what? I can't do it. No, it hurt him a lot. And so she went home and she was wondering, did she do the right thing? She wasn't sure. Meanwhile, Joe decided to come to the United States to study in yeshiva in Monsey, New York. And our fine feathered girl wasn't 21 anymore. Now the years are going by. She's 23, she's 25. And word gets back to Paris that Joe, who knew almost nothing when he was in Paris, had left Monsey and gone on to Israel, where first he joined a school, and then he became so good and such a scholar that he himself became the Rosh Yeshiva, or the dean of his own school. He had 300 students now. And he got married. And now she was already in her 30s. And this Joe had now 5 kids. Listen to what happened. Because we recently experienced this. There was a terrorist attack in Israel. And it was, the word came back to Paris that 3 of his kids were killed in a terrorist attack with his wife. And Sarah was no longer 21, she was now 38 years old. 17 years had passed. And now Joe was going to come back after having sat Shiva and visit with family in Paris, since he still had his family in Paris. And the word started spreading throughout Paris that he was going to come back. And they asked her, would you like to date him? She was now 38 years old. And she was pressed. She says, I'll go out with him. And so the date was scheduled for the same hotel that they had their previous 2 dates. And in through the front door of the lobby walks in a man with the most prestigious looking suit and Homburg hat, very distinguished fellow. She's in absolute shock. She says, Joe? She says, I'm Yosef now. I'm a Rosh Yeshiva. When you knew me, I knew nothing. Today I became the head of the yeshiva. I have 300 students. And he started crying. She starts thinking to herself, wow, what did I do? And he tells her, you have no idea. Because of you, I became who I became. You were the instrumental influence in my life. My wife, he said to her, who was killed in the terrorist attack, used to go to the Western Wall to always pray for you every day that you should get married. And I think about you, and she started to cry. She said, you know what? You had mercy on me, and I didn't have mercy on you. And they continued dating for another 2 or 3 weeks until they got engaged. And thank God she went on to have 2 kids of her own. But ladies and gentlemen, we have to be very open-minded when we're dating someone. We have to look at what they bring to the table, not what we're worried about, what others will say. Do they have character? Do they have values? What's the potential that they bring? And that's what we should be looking for. I hope that tonight's message was helpful, that it educated us and to see what's important. And by all means, if anyone needs me, you can reach me. Just go to drjackcohen18@gmail.com, or you can go to my website, drjackdating.com, or reach me by calling me at 305-206-1916, and I'd be happy to help you in any way if you have any dating or family needs.